The groom handed me an invoice during my daughter's wedding reception at exactly 8:43 p.m. Not a joke, not a prank, an actual three-page carbon copy invoice for $18,742.63. The band was playing Sweet Caroline. My daughter was 20 feet away, laughing beside the champagne tower. And her new husband leaned close to me like we were discussing golf scores and said, "I just need your signature so we can settle the remaining balance." So I signed it. Then I folded the carbon copy carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my old brown jacket. Landon Pierce thought I was just an aging widower from Cedar Rapids who drove a beat-up Ford truck and still used paper coupons at Hy-Vee. What he didn't know was that I'd spent 31 years catching men exactly like him, because the worst mistake a dishonest man can make is assuming a quiet old man is stupid. Now, before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy real family drama with quiet revenge and hard-earned lessons, go ahead and subscribe. Trust me, stay with me here. This story only gets worse from there. My name is Magnus Russell, although most people in Cedar Rapids just call me Mac. If you've ever lived in Iowa long enough, you know nobody keeps their full first name after the age of 40 unless they're running for governor or selling luxury kitchens. I'm 68 years old, widower, bad knees when it rains. I own exactly 3 decent flannel shirts and 1 suit that still smells faintly like church basement coffee from my wife's funeral 11 years ago. And before you start picturing me as some lonely old guy feeding pigeons in a park somewhere, let me stop you right there. I've had a good life, not a flashy one, not the kind people post online with beach houses and matching Christmas pajamas, but a real one, a solid one. I spent 31 years working fraud investigations for Midwest Mutual Insurance. My entire job was looking at documents people hoped nobody would examine too carefully. Claims, invoices, signatures, carbon copies, routing numbers, small lies hidden inside boring paperwork. You'd be amazed how arrogant, dishonest people become when they think nobody's paying attention. Or maybe you wouldn't. I retired at 62 with a coffee mug, a handshake, and lower back pain that still wakes me up around 4:30 every morning. These days I live in the same small ranch house on Maplewood Drive where my daughter Claire grew up. White siding, green shutters, a mailbox that leans slightly left because Harvey Boone backed into it with his riding mower in 2019 and swore the mailbox came out of nowhere. Harvey still denies it, by the way. That man could crash into a lighthouse and blame the ocean. Now Harvey Boone has been my best friend since 1978. Former mail carrier, twice divorced, proud owner of the ugliest collection of Hawaiian shirts in the continental United States. He's the kind of man who says things like, "You can judge a marriage by how people load a dishwasher." And honestly, he's usually right. Most mornings, Harvey and I met at Riley's Cafe on First Avenue around 6:15. Same booth, same waitress, same burnt coffee that somehow tasted comforting anyway. Riley still has those sticky laminated menus that smell faintly like syrup, no matter how many times they wipe them down. Harvey orders biscuits and gravy every single morning, despite his doctor threatening him annually with vivid descriptions of heart disease. I usually got scrambled eggs and weird toast. Wild man over here. That's what my life looked like before Landon Pierce entered it. Quiet, predictable, honest. And I liked it that way. Claire used to like it too. You need to understand something about my daughter before I keep going. Claire Russell was never spoiled, never cruel, never one of those kids who rolled their eyes every time their parents spoke. When she was little, Friday nights were ours. We'd order pizza from Tommaso's on Blair's Ferry Road, spread blankets across the living room floor, and watch old movies while she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. When she was 8, she once told her entire third grade class that I was basically Batman except for accounting, which honestly might still be the best compliment I've ever received. After my wife Evelyn died from ovarian cancer, it was just Claire and me in that house, and we figured it out together. Badly sometimes. There were nights I burned dinner so badly the smoke alarm started screaming like it had personal trauma. Claire once ate half-cooked hamburger helper and told me, "It's okay, Dad. Ketchup fixes most things. That kid saved me more times than she'll ever know." So when she called me one Tuesday evening in March and said, "Dad, I want you to meet someone," I was happy for her. Nervous, sure, but happy. Her previous boyfriends had ranged from forgettable to concerning. One guy sold cryptocurrency out of a storage unit. Another claimed he was between careers for 3 straight years while living entirely off Claire's teacher salary and homemade chili. So when she mentioned Landon Pierce worked in corporate event management in Des Moines and wore actual tailored suits, I remember thinking maybe her luck had finally improved. First impressions matter. And Landon Pierce understood that better than most people. The first time I met him was at a steakhouse called Black Sheep Social Club in downtown Cedar Rapids. Friday evening, snow melting outside, country music playing quietly overhead. He stood when I approached the table. Firm handshake, perfect haircut, expensive navy overcoat folded neatly beside him. Even his watch looked educated. "Mr. Russell," he said, with this polished smile. "Claire talks about you constantly. Now listen, men my age develop instincts. You spend enough decades around insurance fraud and divorce depositions, eventually your gut starts noticing things before your brain catches up." And something about Landon felt rehearsed. Not fake exactly, just professionally calibrated. Like every facial expression had gone through committee approval first. Claire looked happy though. Really happy. So I ignored the little warning bell in my chest. We ordered dinner. Landon talked smoothly about business expansion, destination weddings, luxury clients in Chicago. The man could turn ordering mashed potatoes into a TED Talk about ambition. Harvey would have hated him instantly. Halfway through dinner, the waitress asked if I wanted the 12-ounce sirloin or the ribeye special. I said, whichever one's cheaper and less likely to require a second mortgage. Claire laughed. Landon smiled politely. Then he said, "Come on, Mac. You should enjoy yourself a little more." Simple sentence. Friendly tone. But you know that look people get sometimes. That tiny flicker behind the eyes, where they're not joking quite as much as they pretend to be. Yeah, that look. The conversation moved on, but I noticed Landon glancing at my truck when we walked outside afterward. My silver 2009 Ford F-15 had rust around the wheel wells and a dent near the passenger door from an unfortunate encounter with a grocery cart during the Obama administration. Landon looked at it the way people inspect motel bathrooms. Then he caught himself smiling again. Too late. A week later, Harvey asked me how the dinner went while we sat in our booth at Riley's Cafe. I told him, "He's polished." Harvey snorted into his coffee. "That means you don't trust him." "I didn't say that." Matthew once described a tornado warning as concerning weather. "I know your code language." I laughed despite myself. Then Harvey leaned back and said the sentence that would stay in my head for months afterward. Men who work too hard at looking successful usually got something they're terrified you'll notice. At the time, I thought he was being cynical. Turns out Harvey Boone was seeing the first crack in the wall long before I did. And the first time Landon corrected how I ordered steak at dinner, Harvey nearly choked on his iced tea. Harvey Boone met Landon Pierce exactly 2 weeks after I did, and I swear to you, the man formed an opinion within 14 seconds. Maybe less. We were all having lunch together at Riley's Cafe on a windy Saturday afternoon in April. The kind of Iowa day where the sky can't decide if it wants sunshine, rain, or a biblical plague of flying lawn furniture. Claire had insisted it would be good for everyone to spend time together. Now, whenever somebody says that sentence before a family meal, prepare yourself emotionally. Harvey arrived wearing a bright orange Hawaiian shirt covered in flamingos and carrying the confidence of a man who had never once been embarrassed by himself in public. Landon stood to shake his hand. "Nice to finally meet you, sir," Landon said. Harvey looked him up and down once. Then he said, "You moisturize, don't you?" Claire nearly inhaled her iced tea. I laughed so hard, I snorted coffee through my nose. Landon smiled politely, but I noticed something tiny tighten near his jawline. That was the first thing about Landon Pierce you need to understand. He could tolerate jokes. He just couldn't tolerate not controlling the room. There's a difference. We ordered lunch. Harvey got his usual patty melt with onion rings. I ordered turkey club. Landon requested grilled salmon with dressing on the side, please. Harvey leaned toward me and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "That fish definitely owns a gym membership." Claire kicked him gently under the table. "Be nice," she said. "I am nice," Harvey replied. "If I wasn't nice, I'd ask him what cologne costs more than my truck payment." Landon laughed. But again, that tiny stiffness around the eyes. Pay attention to that next part, because it matters later. People who constantly manage their image eventually get exhausted, and exhausted people make mistakes. At first, Landon's little comments seemed harmless enough. That's how people like him operate. Never enough cruelty to sound openly rude. Just enough to slowly make you feel smaller. He'd glance at my truck and say, "You know, Mac dealerships are offering incredible trade-in deals right now." Or he'd look around my kitchen and casually mention quartz countertops. Once he told Claire right in front of me, "Your dad has such a charmingly simple lifestyle." Now listen, if someone ever describes your life as charmingly simple, there's about an 85% chance they think they're better than you. The remaining 15% are British. Still, I kept my mouth shut. Because Claire loved him, and because old men learn something younger men don't always understand. Yet not every battle deserves your energy. Sometimes patience tells you more than anger ever will. Landon started coming to Cedar Rapids every weekend that spring. Claire seemed lighter around him, happier. She laughed more, Talked about future vacations and furniture and building a life. That part mattered to me. I wanted her happy. Even if the man making her happy occasionally looked at my recliner like it carried contagious diseases. One Sunday afternoon, Claire invited me to tour a condo Landon was considering buying in Des Moines. "Just come see it," she said. "It's beautiful." Now, when your daughter says something is beautiful, you go. Even if parking downtown Des Moines makes you question every decision that led you there. The condo sat on the 7th floor of a renovated warehouse building near the river. Exposed brick walls, massive windows, stainless steel appliances so advanced they probably required software updates. I touched the refrigerator and accidentally turned on jazz music somehow. Landon laughed. "High-tech adjustment period," he said. I smiled along, but honestly, I still don't trust refrigerators with emotional intelligence. Claire showed me the balcony view while Landon poured sparkling water into glasses that looked too fragile for actual humans. Then came one of those moments that seems insignificant until months later when your brain replays it at 3 in the morning. Landon asked me what I thought of the place. I said, "It's nice, expensive though," and he answered, "Well, some investments are worth stretching for." Simple sentence again. Friendly tone again. But there it was, underneath the words. That judgment, like financial caution, was somehow a moral failure. You know that look wealthy salesmen sometimes get when they talk to older people? Like they're already calculating how outdated your opinions are. That look. Claire didn't notice it yet. Or maybe she didn't want to. A few weeks later, Landon invited me to a charity gala in Des Moines because his company was sponsoring the event. Now, I need you to picture me at this thing. 68 years old, navy blazer from Kohl's, reading glasses in my shirt pocket, standing in a ballroom full of people who look like they moisturized recreationally. I felt like somebody accidentally dropped a Home Depot customer into a perfume commercial. Harvey refused to let me go alone. Said, and I quote, "If these people start serving tiny appetizers on spoons again, I want to witness." The gala was held at the Crescent Hotel downtown. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, bartenders with suspenders. Landon moved through that room like a politician, 6 months before election season. Everybody knew him, or at least pretended to. I watched him shake hands, laugh on cue. Compliment, watches compliment, shoes compliment, women's earrings with suspicious accuracy. That's another thing fraud investigators learn. Charm is often just observation wearing expensive shoes. At one point, a man in a gray suit asked Landon, "So what does your future father-in-law do?" And Landon answered, smiling, "Mac's retired now. He enjoys the simple life." There it was again. Simple. Such a harmless word on paper. Such a sharp little knife in person. Harvey leaned toward me and muttered, "Boy talks about you like you're an Amish lamp." I nearly spit bourbon across the tablecloth. But the moment that really stayed with me happened later that evening, near the valet stand. A young valet brought my truck around. The old Ford rattled slightly when it idled because the muffler had needed replacing since roughly the Bush administration. Landon looked embarrassed, not cruel, not openly mocking, just embarrassed. Like my truck reflected poorly on the polished world he was trying to build around himself. And for the first time, I saw something inside him clearly. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of becoming me. That's what drove Landon Pierce more than greed ever did. He grew up poor outside Waterloo, with a father who worked factory shifts until layoffs destroyed his pension. Landon once told Claire he remembered collection notices taped to their front door. I understood that kind of childhood fear. Really, I did. But some people escape poverty and become grateful. Others escape poverty and spend the rest of their lives terrified someone might drag them back. Landon wasn't trying to become rich. He was trying to become untouchable. And people like that eventually start measuring human value by appearances. Cars, zip codes, watches, wedding venues, even fathers. By early summer, Claire was talking about engagement rings. And Harvey Boone said something over breakfast one morning that made my stomach tighten before I even understood why. "Mac," he said quietly, stirring fake sweetener into his coffee, "that boy don't love money nearly as much as he loves what money makes him feel like." I asked him what that meant. Harvey looked out the cafe window for a second before answering. "It means eventually he's going to need somebody to pay for that feeling." Then came the engagement dinner the night Landon stopped pretending money wasn't the point. The engagement dinner happened at a place in Des Moines called Bistro Nomad, tucked between a boutique hotel and a wine bar that always smelled like expensive regret. It was one of those restaurants where the lighting is so low, you start questioning whether your food is undercooked or just emotionally mysterious. Claire looked beautiful that night. Not just my daughter is pretty beautiful. I mean the kind of beautiful that makes strangers briefly forget what they were saying mid-sentence. Landon sat beside her in a tailored charcoal suit, checking his watch once every few minutes, like the evening was running on a schedule only he could see. Harvey came with me, of course. He wore a tan blazer that looked like it had survived at least 2 hurricanes and one minor political scandal. "I'm here for emotional support," he said as we walked in, "and also in case they serve something that requires instructions." We were seated at a round table near the window. Downtown Des Moines glowed outside like someone had spilled warm gold across the city. For the first 30 minutes, everything was almost normal, almost. Landon talked about Claire's future like he was already budgeting it. "We're looking at venues in Chicago," he said. "Something elevated. Something people will remember." Harvey leaned toward me and whispered, "I remember my wedding. Mostly because I was broke for 6 years after it." Claire laughed, but I noticed she was watching Landon carefully, like she was learning how to translate him in real time. Then came the moment everything shifted. The waiter placed the wine bottle on the table, and Landon raised his hand slightly, not even looking at the menu. "We'll take care of the full wedding package," he said casually, "including the upgrades we discussed." I remember that sentence clearly because of how practiced it sounded. Like he'd said it before. Not just in restaurants, in meetings, in conversations where other people's money was involved. Claire blinked. "Upgrades," Landon smiled. "Just details. You know how these things go." That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not suspicion, recognition. I had spent 31 years listening to people explain details that somehow always cost extra money. Harvey cleared his throat. "Funny how details always seem to have receipts attached." Landon chuckled politely, but his fork paused for half a second before continuing. Then the real conversation began. Landon set his wine glass down and leaned forward slightly. "Mac," he said, using my first name like we were now business partners instead of future in-laws, "I want to make sure we're aligned on the financial structure of the wedding." Claire stiffened beside him. "I already told you I'd contribute $12,000, I said calmly. and I had. Clear agreement, written, transferred, no confusion. Landon nodded slowly. Yes, and we appreciate that. But given the expectations Claire has, and the standards we're trying to maintain, there may be some additional costs that arise. Harvey made a quiet sound that might have been a cough or a warning siren. I asked, "What kind of costs?" Landon smiled. That professional, polished smile again. The kind you don't really see coming until the vendors start billing. Now listen to me carefully here. I've sat across from men who faked fire damage in warehouses. I've seen people inflate hospital bills for surgeries that never happened. I've read invoices so creative they deserved their own art exhibit. And something in Landon's phrasing, it clicked. Not fear, not anger, pattern recognition. Claire looked between us. Landon, what are you talking about? He reached out and gently touched her hand. We just want everything perfect, he said. And perfection has a cost. There it was. Perfection. The word rich people use when they want you to feel guilty for asking questions. Harvey leaned back in his chair. Funny thing about perfection, he said casually. It usually shows up on a receipt with 3 decimals. The table went quiet. Even the background music seemed to lower itself slightly. Landon laughed softly, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. That night when I got home, I sat in my garage for a long time without turning the lights on. Just me, the Ford F-150, and a piece of paper I hadn't taken out of my pocket yet. Claire had called it earlier that evening. Dad, she said, please try to get along with him. He's just different. Different. That word parents learn to translate over time. Sometimes it means unique. Sometimes it means temporary. Sometimes it means expensive problems you haven't seen yet. At 11:17 p.m., Harvey texted me a picture of himself holding a half-eaten slice of pie. Caption, still alive. Dinner was suspiciously upscale. I smiled despite everything, but I didn't sleep because something had started forming in my head that night. A pattern, a structure, a shape I recognized from years of reading documents people thought nobody would question. And by the end of that week, I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I started writing things down. Every number Landon mentioned, every vendor he referenced, every upgrade he casually slipped into conversation. I didn't tell Claire. Not yet. Because once you accuse someone like Landon without proof, you don't get answers. You get damage. And I wasn't ready for damage. But I was ready for something else. Understanding. And maybe, just maybe, quiet correction. Harvey noticed, of course. He always notices. One morning at Riley's Cafe, he watched me jot down a note on a napkin and said, "You're doing that thing again." What thing? The thing where you stop being a retired man and start being a problem for someone else. I didn't look up from my coffee. I'm just paying attention. Harvey nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what worries me. A week later, Claire sent a photo of wedding invitations. Cream paper, gold lettering, fancy enough to make my handwriting feel personally inadequate. Landon had added a line at the bottom, hosted, with appreciation for the Russell family's generous contribution. Generous. That word again. I stared at it longer than I should have. And that was when I understood something I hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a transaction Landon expected to control. And somewhere inside all of it, There would be a document, a signature, a mistake, something he believed I wouldn't notice. He just didn't realize yet. I had been waiting my entire career for people like him to become comfortable, because comfortable people make the best mistakes. And the engagement dinner had already started him down that road, slowly, confidently, exactly the way I needed. By the time summer rolled into Iowa, the wedding stopped looking like a wedding and started looking like a financial ecosystem. That's the only way I can describe it. Every conversation with Landon Pierce began to sound like a budget meeting disguised as romance. Claire called me one Sunday morning while I was fixing the mailbox Harvey had backed into for the second time, don't ask, and said, "Dad, can you talk? Landon is here, going over vendors again." There was something in her voice I didn't like. Not fear, exactly. More like fatigue. The kind that builds slowly when you keep trying to smile through things that don't feel right. I drove to Des Moines that afternoon. The venue they had chosen was called the Riverbend Grand Ballroom, right along the Cedar River. High ceilings, exposed brick and windows, so large you could see the water reflecting the sky like a moving mirror. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. Landon stood in the middle of the empty hall with a clipboard in one hand and a tablet in the other, like a general planning a campaign no one else fully understood. He looked up when I walked in. "Magnus," he said, smiling. "Perfect timing. We're just finalizing some enhancements." That word again. Enhancements. I once had a claims manager use that same word to describe a falsified repair estimate on a warehouse fire in Davenport. He ended up explaining it to a federal investigator in a room without windows. I nodded slowly. Enhancements to what exactly? Claire came over, quickly slipping her arm through mine, like she used to do when she was a kid, crossing busy streets, lighting floral arrangements, catering, she said, trying to sound upbeat. Just details. Landon tapped his tablet. Details define experience. Harvey, who had insisted on coming because he said he didn't trust men with tablets, and too much confidence, wandered toward a chair and sat down like he was inspecting enemy territory. Back in my day, Harvey said details defined whether you got soup or disappointment. Landon chuckled, but I saw it again, that slight tightening behind his eyes. He was patient, but only when he controlled the environment. And here in this space, he didn't fully control it yet, not with me present. Over the next hour, I watched something unfold that I've seen dozens of times in fraud cases. Inflation dressed as ambition. The floral package doubled for visual impact. The catering switched to premium seasonal selection. The bar package mysteriously upgraded itself to artisan bourbon experience. Every time Claire hesitated, Landon leaned in slightly and said the same thing in different forms. "Claire deserves this." That was his favorite weapon. Not logic, not facts. Guilt disguised as love. By the time we left the ballroom, Claire looked like someone trying to hold together a picture frame with shaking hands. In the parking lot, Harvey leaned into my truck window and said, "That boy's got the soul of a man who thinks every problem is solved with someone else's wallet." I didn't answer right away, because I was thinking about something else. Patterns, numbers, invoices, and something I had noticed earlier that day while Landon wasn't paying attention. A vendor name that appeared twice, with two different price structures. That night I started pulling threads, quietly, carefully. The way you do when you don't want the entire structure to collapse before you understand what's holding it up. Claire thought I was just being supportive. Harvey knew better. He showed up at my house at 9:30 p.m. holding a paper bag from Casey's General Store. Donuts, he said, for moral support and cholesterol balance. We sat at my kitchen table under the yellow light that flickers slightly every time the air conditioner kicks on. I laid out printouts, emails, vendor confirmations, bank transfer notes. Harvey looked at the stack and said, "Mac, this looks like the paperwork version of a crime documentary." I didn't smile. Not yet. Because something was forming. A shape. A structure. A gap. And gaps in financial paperwork are never accidents. They're routing payments through 3 different entities, I said quietly. Same vendors, different invoices, different markup structures. Harvey leaned forward. Meaning someone is building the same expense twice and hoping nobody compares versions. Harvey took a bite of donut. And does anybody compare versions? I looked at him. I do. That was the moment Harvey stopped joking. He wiped his hands slowly and said, "So what are you going to do?" I leaned back in my chair. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I used to feel in my old office. Not anger, not even frustration, clarity. "I'm going to wait," I said. Harvey frowned. Wait for what? For him to put his signature on something he thinks is harmless. Harvey stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Ah," he said quietly. "So it's one of those plans." "Yes. The kind where somebody eventually regrets being born. I prefer to think of it as paperwork consequences." He laughed then, finally, but softer this time, because he understood. By the end of that week, I had what I needed. Not everything, but enough. A signed vendor authorization document that tied Landon directly to inflated billing practices through Pierce Signature Events, LLC. And more importantly, a carbon copy trail. Clean, undeniable. The kind of thing you don't argue against. You survive it. I didn't tell Claire. Not yet. Because once you bring something like that into a wedding, you don't just expose fraud. You break something bigger. You break trust. And I needed Landon to break that himself. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I let him think he was winning. And I waited for the moment he would ask me for money again. Because men like Landon Pierce always come back to the table. They just never realize when the table has already been set for them. And 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. But I already knew who it was before I answered. Landon's voice came through, smooth as ever. "Magnus," he said, "we should grab brunch. Talk through final wedding numbers." I looked at Harvey, who was sitting across from me, eating toast like it was a strategic operation. I covered the phone slightly. "He invited me to brunch," I said. Harvey nodded slowly. "Then I guess he said it's time to see what kind of man he is when he thinks he's collecting something." I picked up the phone again. "Sure," I said. "Brunch sounds good." And that was the first time I agreed to a meeting I already knew I was going to control. I've learned over the years that real trouble rarely announces itself. It doesn't kick the door in. It slips in through an email you weren't supposed to see. That's exactly how it started. A Tuesday morning in late June, I was sitting in my garage with a cup of coffee that had gone cold somewhere. Between my first sip and my third unread text from Harvey saying, "Don't ignore me. I have important donut-related news." My laptop was open on an old folding table I used for fixing small engine parts, and occasionally, apparently dismantling people's financial illusions. That's when I saw it. An email thread forwarded by accident. Subject line: invoice confirmation, Riverbend. Grand ballroom package adjustment. It was meant for Landon, but it came to me. I didn't open it immediately. That's another habit you develop in my line of work. You don't rush good evidence. You respect it. Let it sit there for a second. Let it exist before you disturb it. Then I clicked, and there it was. Line items, vendor names, payment confirmations. Not just numbers, but structure, patterns. The same floral vendor listed twice under slightly different service categories. A catering upgrade marked as client requested with no signature attached. And most importantly, a payment trail that didn't originate from me. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Harvey," I said out loud, even though he wasn't there. Then I called him anyway. He picked up on the second ring. "You better not be calling me to fix your mailbox again," he said. "I found something," I replied. Silence. That's how you know you have someone's full attention. I emailed him the screenshot. He called me back immediately. "Magnus," he said, unusually quiet, "either you're looking at fraud or somebody is running a wedding like a Ponzi scheme." "Feels like both," I said. That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not anger, not even disappointment, confirmation. The shape I'd been tracing for weeks finally had edges. By noon, I was sitting at Riley's Cafe with Harvey, 2 cups of coffee between us, and a stack of printed documents that made the laminated menu look like light reading. Harvey flipped through them slowly. "This is impressive," he said, in a deeply concerning way. I pointed at a vendor authorization form. "See this same floral company, 2 invoices, 2 price structures, 1 payment loop." Harvey squinted. "So he's charging twice." "Not exactly," I said. "He's charging once officially, and once through inflated adjustments routed through his LLC. Harvey leaned back. "So your future son-in-law is creatively billing your daughter's wedding. That's one way to say it. What's the other way?" I took a sip of coffee. "Fraud." Harvey whistled low. "That's a strong word. It's a precise one." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a school bus pulled up, and a group of kids ran toward the cafe window laughing, like the world still made simple sense. Inside, I kept looking at numbers that didn't belong together. Harvey tapped the papers. "What's the end game here?" I knew what he meant. Why not confront him? Why not stop it immediately? Because men like Landon Pierce don't stop when confronted. They adjust, they spin, they explain. And worse, they warn you by calling you confused. "No," I said quietly. "I need him to sign something." Harvey frowned. "Sign what?" I reached into my folder and pulled out a blank authorization template I had prepared years ago for a completely different case. Clean language, standard vendor verification clause. Nothing unusual on the surface, but inside it, a very specific accounting structure that would force every hidden payment channel to surface if later audited. Harvey looked at it and raised an eyebrow. "You made this yourself?" "I refined it," I said. He nodded slowly. "That's either genius or illegal. It's neither." I said, "It's documentation." That afternoon, I called Janet Holloway. She answered on the third ring. "Mac, She said, if this is another situation where you've accidentally discovered financial wrongdoing at a wedding, I'm starting to think you attract these things. I prefer to think I notice them, I replied. She laughed once. Fair. What do you need? I explained everything, quietly, carefully. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. Then she said, do you have a signed carbon copy of anything from him? Yet I looked at the folder on my table. Yes, I said. A longer pause. Then her voice sharpened slightly. Magnus, please tell me you're about to do what I think you're about to do. I'm about to have a conversation over brunch. She sighed. That's how every disaster in your life starts, isn't it? Food. Usually coffee, I corrected. She gave me a time and legal instructions. And one final warning. Don't let him know you're smarter than he is until it's too late. I smiled a little. That won't be a problem. By the next morning, Landon texted me the restaurant details. Granite City Food and Brewery, 11:30 a.m. Casual tone, business casual dress, like we were discussing weekend plans instead of structural financial deception. Claire called me that same morning. Dad, she said, just be nice today, okay? Landon's been stressed with wedding logistics. I stood in my garage looking at my truck. I'll be nice, I said, and I meant it, because nice and harmless are not the same thing. At 11:18 a.m., I walked into Granite City with a folder under my arm, and Harvey Boone 2 steps behind me muttering, if they serve overpriced eggs, I'm billing them emotionally. Landon was already seated, perfect posture, confident smile. Claire beside him, Landon Pierce across the table, and an empty chair waiting for me like the last piece of a puzzle. He stood when I approached. Mac, he said warmly. Glad you could make it. I sat down, set the folder on the table, and for the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was being invited into something. I felt like I was arriving on time. Granite City Food and Brewery has this way of making everything feel slightly too loud. The clinking glasses, the open kitchen noise, the forced cheerfulness of brunch crowds who all pretend they don't have complicated lives waiting for them outside. That morning, it felt like the restaurant was holding its breath. Or maybe that was just me noticing things more carefully than usual. Landon Pierce stood up when I arrived, like we were in a meeting he controlled. Mac, he said, smiling, thanks for coming. Claire looked up at me quickly. There was something in her eyes I couldn't fully read yet. Not anger, not relief. Something in between. Landon Pierce gave me a polite nod that somehow managed to feel like a temperature drop. Harvey slid into the seat beside me without asking permission, placed a napkin on his lap like he was attending a diplomatic summit, and whispered, if they charge $12 for orange juice, I'm starting a petition. I almost smiled. Almost. Landon gestured toward the table. We're just going over final financials for the wedding. There it was again. Financials. Like this was a corporate merger instead of a marriage. He slid a small stack of printed pages toward me. Itemized estimates, vendor breakdowns, adjustment sheets. Claire leaned slightly forward. Landon said there were some last-minute increases. I nodded slowly. I see that, I said. Landon continued smoothly. Nothing major. Just standard industry variances. Standard. Another word people use when they want you to stop asking questions. Harvey leaned toward me and muttered, "Everything he says sounds like a subscription you didn't agree to." I exhaled lightly through my nose. Then I opened my folder. That's when the room shifted. Not dramatically. No one noticed at first. But I did. Because I've seen this reaction before. It's the moment when someone realizes the conversation is no longer theoretical. I placed the first document on the table. Vendor authorization form. Signed. Then another. Bank transfer confirmation. Then another. Carbon copy invoice printouts. Clean, aligned, chronological. Landon's smile didn't disappear immediately. It just stopped being comfortable. "What is this?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at Claire. "I need you to stay with me here," I said gently. Her face tightened slightly. That sentence alone told her something serious was coming. Harvey whispered, "Oh, this is the part where brunch becomes a documentary." I ignored him. Then I turned back to Landon. "These are your vendor payments," I said calmly. "Cross-referenced with your LLC routing structure." Elaine Pierce blinked. "Your what?" I continued. "You billed Claire's wedding through Pierce Signature Events, LLC. Some of those charges were duplicated under adjustments." Landon leaned back slightly. Not shocked, not yet, but recalculating. "That's not accurate," he said quickly. "Those are standard package upgrades requested by—" I raised a hand gently. And that's when I placed the carbon copy invoice on top of everything. The one from the reception. The one he handed me. The one I signed. The room went quiet in a way that felt physically noticeable. Claire stared at it, slowly, like she didn't want to understand what she was seeing. "I kept the carbon copy," I said. Landon's jaw tightened. Harvey quietly said, "That's my boy." I opened my next folder. Bank confirmations, time-stamped vendor emails, matching invoice codes, everything aligned, everything clean. Too clean for him to argue casually. Landon finally laughed once. A short, sharp sound. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're accusing me of fraud at my own wedding brunch." "No," I corrected. "I'm documenting it." That word hit differently. Claire looked between us. "Dad, what are you saying?" I turned toward her. And this is the part I never practiced. Because no one prepares you for explaining truth to someone you love when the truth hurts someone else they love. I'm saying I said slowly that some of the charges you were told were upgrades were already paid through other channels. Elaine snapped. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a verifiable one," I replied. Landon leaned forward now, the polite mask starting to crack. "You don't understand how weddings work," he said. I almost laughed. That sentence, that assumption, that idea that experience only exists in one direction. "I understand how billing works," I said quietly. Silence again. Harvey broke it. "Kid," he said to Landon, "I've seen less paperwork in a tax audit at a county fair." Claire looked like she was trying to hold the table together with sheer willpower. "Landon," she said softly, "is any of this true?" That was the moment. Not the documents, not the carbon copy. That question, because Landon had two choices. Stay controlled or let ego speak. He chose ego. "You're seriously listening to this?" he said, gesturing toward me. This is a misunderstanding from someone who doesn't even understand modern event pricing. I nodded slowly. That was the mistake. Not the fraud, not the invoices, the tone. Because he said it like I was irrelevant. Not wrong, irrelevant. And Claire heard it. Her eyes shifted slightly. Something inside her recalibrating. I leaned forward just a bit. Landon, I said quietly, do you want me to walk through the routing numbers? Or do you want to tell me why the same vendor appears under two different invoices at two different price points? He hesitated. Just long enough. That hesitation told me everything. Elaine interrupted sharply. This is humiliating. Harvey muttered. Yeah, for him. Landon's voice rose slightly. This is insane. I've been planning this wedding for months. For profit, I said. The table froze again. Even the server nearby stopped mid-step. Claire whispered, Dad. I didn't look away from Landon, because this part mattered too much. You didn't just plan a wedding, I said. You structured it like a billing cycle. His face changed then. Just slightly, but enough. Because for the first time, he wasn't managing the room. He was reacting to it. And people like Landon Pierce don't handle that well. You don't have proof, he said. I pushed the final document forward. Signed vendor authorization. Carbon trail attached. Bank confirmations. Cross-linked entities. Janet Holloway's audit structure flagged in the margin. I do, I said. Silence again. Longer this time. Claire reached for the carbon copy slowly. Her hands trembled slightly. Is this what you gave him to sign? She asked me. Yes, I said. She looked at Landon. Not angry yet, not fully. Just searching. And that was the most dangerous moment in the entire room. Because when someone you love stops defending you, everything starts collapsing quietly. Landon opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he didn't have a smooth sentence ready. Harvey leaned back and said softly, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a bad morning. Claire whispered. How long? Landon froze. That question mattered more than all the documents. How long were you planning to do this to my dad? The room didn't move. Not even air. And Landon Pierce, for all his confidence, finally understood something very important. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was exposure. And exposure is something you can't charm your way out of. Not even with perfect hair and expensive suits. Nobody at that table ate after Claire asked that question. Not a bite. Not a sip. Even the noise from Granite City Food and Brewery seemed to fade into something distant, like the world had decided to step back and watch what would happen next. How long? Claire asked again, quieter this time. Her voice wasn't angry. That would have been easier. Anger burns fast. What she had was something colder, something that takes longer to recover from. Landon Pierce looked at her like he was trying to find the correct version of himself to respond with. That's what people like him do when the room stops agreeing with them. They search for a persona, the confident one, the calm one, the misunderstood one. But none of them were loading properly anymore. Harvey Boone leaned back in his chair and muttered, "This is the part where the Wi-Fi in his personality goes out." I didn't smile this time, because Claire was still waiting, and I could see it in her face now. She wasn't just asking about invoices. She was asking about trust. About every conversation she replayed in her head. About every time she defended him to herself. Landon finally spoke. Claire, I don't know what your father has convinced you of, I interrupted gently. I didn't convince her of anything. I tapped the carbon copy invoice once. I just showed her what you signed. That hit harder than anything else I'd said. Because signatures don't argue. They don't reinterpret themselves. They just exist. Elaine Pierce suddenly leaned forward. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. You're trying to ruin a wedding over paperwork. Harvey let out a small laugh. Ma'am, he said, paperwork is how most people ruin themselves. He's just providing receipts. Landon's jaw tightened again. He turned toward me now. Not Claire, me. You went through my business records? He asked. No, I said calmly. I went through the records attached to my daughter's name. That distinction mattered, and he knew it, because for the first time, I saw something flicker in his expression that wasn't confidence or charm. It was calculation turning into panic. Claire stood up slowly. Her chair scraped softly against the floor. Landon, she said, tell me the truth. There it was again. The moment every system breaks down. Not evidence, not documents, a simple request for honesty. Landon exhaled through his nose, and then he did something I'll never forget. He smiled. Not the polished one, not the controlled one. A smaller, sharper version, like a man realizing he might as well stop pretending. You want the truth, he said. Claire didn't answer, so he kept going. I structured things, he admitted. Yes. I organized vendor billing in a way that optimized cash flow between accounts. Harvey muttered, Oh, he's doing corporate poetry now. Landon ignored him. It's standard in high-end event coordination, he continued. You move funds between channels to secure premium rates and maintain vendor relationships. I nodded slowly. That's not what I'm seeing, I said. He pointed at my documents. That's because you're not in the industry. Claire flinched slightly at his tone. That was the shift. Subtle, but irreversible. Because now it wasn't just about money. It was about respect, or lack of it. I leaned forward again. Landon, I said quietly, did Claire authorize these charges? He hesitated. Just long enough. And that was all I needed. Claire saw it too. Her voice dropped. You didn't tell me. Landon turned back to her quickly. Claire, I was handling logistics, so you wouldn't have to worry. No, she said, shaking her head slightly. That's not what I asked. Silence again. This one heavier than the rest. Elaine Pierce looked like she wanted to interrupt, but even she could feel it now. Something had already shifted beyond her control. Harvey broke the silence again, softer this time. You know, he said, I once saw a guy try to explain away 3 different gas station receipts during a divorce. This feels like that, but with better lighting. No one laughed. Not even me. Claire slowly sat back down. Her hands were clenched under the table now. I want to see everything she said. Landon's voice sharpened slightly. Claire, everything, she repeated. And that's when the last mask slipped. Not fully, but enough. Landon leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Then he said something that changed the entire room. I was trying to give you a wedding you could be proud of. That sentence, that justification, that attempt to reframe control as love. I've heard it before. In claims reports, in depositions, in apologies that come too late. Claire stared at him. You mean a wedding that cost more than you told us? She asked. Landon's silence answered before he did. I watched her face carefully. Because this was the point where people either collapse or wake up. Claire looked down at the carbon copy invoice again. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dad, why did you keep this? I took a breath. And for the first time that day, I softened my tone completely. Because I didn't trust what I was seeing, I said. And I trusted what I've seen my entire life more. She looked at me, not fully understanding yet, but not rejecting me either. That mattered. Landon tried one more time. This is being blown out of proportion, he said. We can resolve this privately. Harvey cut him off immediately. Oh, I love that part, he said. That's where guys suddenly discover privacy after public math stops working for them. A few people nearby had started watching openly now. Phones weren't out yet, but they were close. Claire stood again, this time slower, more deliberate. I need air, she said. She walked away from the table, and for the first time since this started, Landon didn't follow her immediately. He just watched, like he was realizing the situation was no longer responding to him. Elaine stood up quickly. This is not how we handle family matters. Harvey replied without looking at her, ma'am. I think the family part already left the building. Landon finally turned to me. All the charm was gone now. What do you want? He asked quietly. That was the first honest question he had asked all morning. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I answered simply, I already got it. He frowned. I tapped the carbon copy invoice one last time. Your signature. That was it. No shouting, no victory speech. Just a fact. And for the first time, Landon Pierce understood exactly what room he was sitting in. Not a brunch, not a negotiation. An audit that had already been completed. Claire didn't come back to the table for almost 20 minutes. Harvey stayed seated like he was guarding a crime scene, slowly finishing a glass of water he had no intention of paying for emotionally. Landon Pierce had gone completely quiet, not the confident silence from earlier. This was different. This was the silence of a man recalculating every version of himself he had ever presented in the last 6 months. Elaine Pierce kept checking her phone like it might provide an alternate reality where invoices didn't have consequences. And me, I just sat there waiting. Because the thing about exposure is that it doesn't end when you present the evidence. It ends when people finish processing it. Harvey leaned toward me and muttered, You ever notice how silence gets heavier when people realize lawyers are in the same ecosystem as their mistakes? I didn't respond, because Claire was walking back, slowly, not rushed, not emotional, just different. She sat down again, but not beside Landon, slightly angled away from him. That small shift said more than anything spoken. I called my bank, she said quietly. Landon straightened slightly. Claire. She held up a hand. No. Let me finish. Her voice was steady now, but it wasn't soft anymore. It had structure. You told me you were covering vendor coordination costs, she said. But I just confirmed payments came from multiple accounts I never authorized. Landon opened his mouth, closed it again. Claire continued. And some of those accounts weren't even in my name. Harvey whispered under his breath, Oh boy. Here comes the spreadsheet apocalypse. I kept my eyes on Claire, because this was her moment now. Not mine. Landon finally spoke carefully. There's a logical explanation for all of this. Claire nodded slowly. I'm sure there is. That tone, that calm agreement without acceptance. That's when I knew she was done believing him. Not fully healed, not fully gone, but done believing. Claire turned slightly toward me. Dad, she said, what happens next? That question wasn't about Landon. It was about direction, about safety, about whether the ground she was standing on still held. I answered honestly. Next, I said, we let the documentation speak for itself. Landon Pierce suddenly leaned forward again. This is a private family matter, she said sharply. Harvey finally looked at her directly. Ma'am, he said with all due respect, nothing involving a carbon copy invoice at brunch is private anymore. That shut her down instantly. Landon exhaled slowly. Then he leaned back in his chair, and for the first time that morning, he stopped trying to win. You planned this, he said to me quietly. I shook my head. No, I said. I observed it. He let out a short laugh. It's the same thing. No, I replied. Planning requires intent. Observation just requires honesty. Claire looked between us. Her voice was lower now. You made him sign it, she asked me. I met her eyes. I didn't make him do anything I said. I gave him a document. He chose to sign it. That distinction mattered. And I could see her processing it in real time. Landon rubbed his jaw slowly. You've been waiting for this, he said. I nodded once. Yes. That honesty landed harder than any accusation, because I wasn't denying it. I wasn't pretending I had stumbled into it accidentally. I had waited, carefully, patiently. Claire stood again, but this time she didn't leave. She just looked at Landon. I need space, she said. Landon stood. Quickly now. Claire, we can fix this. She shook her head. You didn't tell me the truth, she said. Not once today. Silence again. This one final. Harvey quietly finished his water and said, That's usually the part where the relationship enters what I call the extended warranty phase. It's not covered. Claire turned away from him. Not angrily, just finished listening. She walked out of the restaurant again. And this time Landon didn't follow at all. He just sat there. Still. Elaine stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. You've humiliated our family, Harvey replied without looking up. Ma'am, your son-in-law did that part. We're just paperwork witnesses. She froze, then turned and left the table in a sharp, controlled exit that still managed to sound like a door slam without the door. Now it was just three of us. Me, Harvey, and Landon Pierce. Landon looked at me for a long time. No charm left, no performance, just something raw underneath. You don't understand what this does, he said quietly. I nodded. I do, I said. He shook his head slightly. No, he said. You don't. And for the first time, I actually believed him. Not about the fraud, not about the invoices, about something deeper. About what it feels like when your entire identity is built on control, and control disappears in public. Harvey stood up slowly. I'm going to go check on Claire, he said quietly. He looked at me. You good? I nodded. Go. He left. And for the first time, it was just me and Landon. He stared at the carbon copy invoice on the table, then at me, then back again. You could have just asked for money back, he said. I almost smiled. That was never the point. He frowned. Then what was? I leaned forward slightly, and for the first time all day, I lowered my voice. Truth, I said simply. That word hung there. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. Landon looked down at the table, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something that wasn't calculation. It was recognition, not of guilt, but of loss. Because in that moment, he realized something he couldn't fix with money charm or explanation. Some things, once seen clearly, don't go back to being invisible. The silence between us stretched until it felt like it belonged to someone else's story. Then I stood up. I picked up my folder, and before I left, I looked at him one last time. This isn't over, he said quietly. I nodded. No, I said, it isn't. And I walked out. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, just real. Harvey was waiting by the curb with Claire, who stood with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the ground. When she saw me, she didn't smile, but she didn't turn away either. And that in its own way was the beginning of something else. Not an ending, not forgiveness, something unfinished, something still forming. And as I stood there beside my daughter, I realized something simple but important. Winning was never going to be the part that mattered. What mattered was what was left after the truth arrived. The drive back to Cedar Rapids was quiet in a way that felt heavier than noise. Harvey followed behind me in his old blue Chevy, probably talking to himself the entire time, like he always does when he's thinking too hard. Claire rode with me in the passenger seat, staring out the window without saying a word. Her wedding dress was still at the hotel. Nobody had mentioned it. Not yet. The Iowa highway stretched out in front of us like a long, indifferent ribbon. Fields on both sides. Green turning gold in places where the sun hit just right. Normally I find that kind of view calming. That day it just felt unfinished. Claire finally spoke somewhere near Iowa City. Was any of it real? She asked. I didn't ask her what she meant. I already knew. I kept my eyes on the road. I think some of it was, I said carefully, but not the parts you were promised. She nodded slowly, like she was accepting something she didn't want to name yet. Behind us, Harvey's truck radio must have been playing something old and scratchy because I could faintly hear a country song drifting through the open window. He liked music that sounded like it had already survived something. Claire hugged her arms tighter. I feel stupid, she said quietly. I shook my head immediately. No, I said. You feel blindsided. There's a difference. She let out a short breath that almost turned into a laugh, but didn't quite make it. Dad, she said, how did you know? That question sat between us for a while because the honest answer wasn't simple. I didn't know everything I said finally. I just knew when something didn't line up. She turned toward me slightly. That's not normal, you know. I nodded. I worked in insurance fraud for 31 years, I said. Normal stopped being useful a long time ago. That earned the faintest smile from her. Not much, but enough. We pulled into Cedar Rapids just before sunset. The house on Maplewood Drive looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just felt bigger inside it now. Harvey parked behind me and got out slowly, stretching his back. "All right," he said. "I'm officially too old for emotional highways." Claire didn't move right away. She sat in the passenger seat, looking at the house like it might change if she stared long enough. Then she finally said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." That was the real question of the day. Not about Landon, not about invoices, about direction. I turned the engine off. First, I said, "You breathe." Harvey nodded from behind us. Solid advice. I also recommend snacks. Snacks fix about 40% of human collapse. Claire let out a small sound that might have been a laugh. I took that as progress. Inside the house, everything felt too still. The kind of stillness that happens after something important has left but hasn't closed the door behind it. Claire went straight to the kitchen and sat down at the table she used to do homework on when she was 12. Harvey immediately opened the fridge like he lived there. "You still have that weird mustard," he announced. "I respect consistency." I didn't respond. I was watching Claire. She was staring at her hands. "I don't understand him," she said finally. "You don't need to," I replied. That made her look up. "What does that mean?" I leaned against the counter. "It means understanding someone doesn't always help you deal with them," I said. "Sometimes clarity is enough." Harvey nodded from the fridge. "Preach." A long silence followed. Then Claire said something I didn't expect. "Do you think I should have seen it?" That question always hits harder than anger because it turns pain inward. I walked over and sat across from her. "No," I said, "because you were looking at the person, not the pattern." She frowned slightly. "What's the difference?" I thought about that for a moment. "The person is what they show you," I said. "The pattern is what they repeat when they think nobody's counting." Harvey closed the fridge. "And Landon?" he asked. I exhaled slowly. "He repeats numbers," I said. "That's what he does." Claire nodded slowly. Then she whispered, "Is it over?" That question again. "The one nobody ever answers cleanly." I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said honestly. "It's not over. But it's not yours anymore either." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said carefully, "that what happens next is legal, not emotional." Harvey raised a finger. "Translation boring paperwork. Apocalypse." Claire leaned back slightly. And for the first time since the brunch, her shoulders dropped just a little. Like something inside her had stopped bracing for impact. 2 days later, Janet Holloway called me. Her tone was different than usual. Not surprised, not impressed, focused. "You were right," she said simply. I didn't respond immediately because I knew what that meant. "We traced the vendor routing structure," she continued. "Multiple inflated invoices, same shell company pattern. He's been doing this across at least 3 events." Harvey, who was sitting at my table eating cereal out of a coffee mug, stopped mid-bite. Claire wasn't in the room, but she would hear about it later. Janet continued, "We're moving it into civil investigation territory." I nodded slowly. "Understood." There was a pause. Then she added, "Your carbon copy was the anchor piece." Harvey muttered, "Of course it was." The man collects receipts like Pokemon. After the call ended, the house felt quieter again. Claire came down the hallway a few minutes later. "Is it happening?" she asked. I nodded. Yes. She sat down slowly. And Landon hesitated just long enough to choose honesty over comfort. He's going to be dealing with consequences, I said. She nodded. Not shocked, just tired. A week later, Claire went back to the Riverbend Grand Ballroom alone. Harvey went with her. He said he needed to make sure nobody tried to charge her for emotional damage on the way out. I stayed home. Not because I didn't want to go, because some things belong to the person they happen to. When she came back that evening, she didn't say much. She just placed something on the kitchen table. Her engagement ring. Not dramatic, not angry, just final in a quiet way. I need time, she said. I nodded. That's okay. Harvey didn't joke this time. He just patted her shoulder and said, That's the smartest sentence anybody said all week. Later that night, Claire sat at the kitchen table again. Same place, different person, but still here. That mattered more than anything else. I poured 3 cups of coffee. One for me, one for Harvey, one for her. Harvey raised his cup and said, To surviving expensive mistakes. Claire let out a small breath, and this time she actually smiled. It wasn't fixed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as I sat there listening to the quiet hum of a house that had seen too much and was still standing, I realized something I didn't expect to feel. Not victory, not satisfaction, just something softer. Continuation. Because some endings don't end clean. They just teach you how to keep going. The weeks after everything fell apart didn't feel dramatic. That's the strange part people don't talk about. There's no thunder, no final speech, no cinematic silence where everyone suddenly understands everything. Just mornings, coffee, phone calls you don't want to answer, and a house that feels a little too quiet in places where laughter used to live. Claire stayed in Cedar Rapids. She didn't go back to Des Moines right away, and she didn't make any big declarations about her future either. She just existed in a quieter version of her life, like someone slowly stepping out of water and realizing they were colder than they thought. Harvey called it emotional recalibration. Claire called it being tired all the time. I called it recovery. Landon Pierce, from what Janet Holloway told me, stopped being a name that showed up in wedding conversations and started being a name that showed up in legal folders, civil review, vendor audits, contract discrepancies. Nothing criminal in the dramatic sense people imagine from movies. No handcuffs, no sirens, just consequences that arrive slowly and politely, but don't leave. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the brunch, Claire and I went back to Riley's Cafe on First Avenue. Same booth, same sticky menu, same burnt coffee that somehow still tasted like familiarity. Harvey was already there, of course. He looked up as we walked in and said, If anyone brings up weddings, I'm charging emotional admission fees today. Claire actually laughed. Not forced, not polite. Real laughter. It was small, but it landed differently than it had in weeks. She sat across from me, stirring her coffee, without drinking it at first. I saw the ring in a drawer yesterday, she said quietly. I nodded, and I didn't feel anything she admitted. Not anger, not sadness, just distance. Harvey leaned back. That's usually step 2, he said. Step 1 is chaos. Step 2 is numb. Step 3 is you start judging people's coffee choices again. Claire smiled faintly. I miss being able to trust people, she said after a moment. I looked at her carefully. That doesn't go away, I said. It just gets rebuilt differently. She frowned slightly. Different how I thought about it. You stop trusting appearances first, I said. Then you learn to trust consistency instead. Harvey nodded. Translation. He said you stop trusting fancy shoes and start trusting who shows up when it rains. Claire looked down at her cup. That feels exhausting, she said. It is, I replied honestly. But I added, it's also safer. There was a pause. The kind of pause that doesn't ask for answers, just space. Then Claire said something I didn't expect. Dad, do you regret it? I knew what she meant. The brunch, the documents, the carbon copy invoice that started everything. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. No, I said. She watched me carefully. Not even a little. I shook my head. I regret that you had to see it happen, I said, but not that it was stopped. Harvey raised his cup slightly. That's the most accountant answer I've ever heard in my life, he said. Claire smiled faintly again, but softer this time, like she was learning how to hold it without forcing it. Outside Cedar Rapids looked the same as it always did. Quiet streets, slow traffic, people who wave even when they don't know you well enough to wave. But inside that cafe, something had shifted. Not fixed, not healed. Shifted. Later that evening, Claire helped me fix the porch light at the house. It had been flickering for weeks. Harvey showed up uninvited as usual, holding a screwdriver and saying I sensed mechanical distress. We stood there for a while working in silence. That comfortable kind of silence that only happens when people have already said the worst things they needed to say. Claire finally broke it. I think I understand something. Now, she said. I looked over. What's that? She tightened the last screw on the fixture and stepped back. That people can be honest about the wrong things, she said, and dishonest about the right ones. I nodded slowly. That's a good way to put it. Harvey pointed at the light. If that thing stays on for more than a week, I'm declaring it a miracle, he said. We laughed. And this time it didn't feel like we were laughing around something painful. Just through it. A month later, Claire started volunteering again at her school full-time. Then she picked up extra tutoring sessions. Not because she was running from anything, but because routine was becoming something she could stand inside again. One Sunday morning, she came into the kitchen while I was reading the paper. She sat down across from me like she used to when she was younger. I ran into someone from the wedding, she said. I lowered the paper slightly. Oh, she nodded. They asked if I was okay, and I said yes, she replied. And I meant it, but not in the way they think. Harvey, who was already in my kitchen eating cereal again, for reasons no one fully understood anymore, raised an eyebrow. That sounds suspiciously like growth, he said. Claire smiled. Maybe it is. I folded the newspaper. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something settle. Not fully resolved, but no longer chaotic. That afternoon, I drove alone down Maplewood Drive, past familiar houses, past mailboxes Harvey had definitely not hit this time. And I thought about Landon Pierce, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just clarity. He wasn't a villain, not really. He was something more common than that. Someone who confused control with love, an image with value, and in doing so built something that couldn't hold weight. That's the thing about people like him. They don't fall because someone pushes them. They fall because they build too fast on unstable ground and call it confidence. When I got back home, Claire was sitting on the porch steps with a cup of coffee. Harvey was already there, of course, arguing with a squirrel. I sat down beside her. She leaned slightly toward me. "Do you think I'll ever trust someone like that again?" she asked quietly. I thought about it. Honestly, no, I said. She looked at me slightly worried. "And that's okay," I added, "because next time you won't need to." She nodded slowly. And this time she didn't look like she was trying to fix anything. Just understand it. Harvey stood up stretched and said, "All right. I'm declaring this emotional arc officially less terrible than expected." Claire laughed. And I did too. Not because everything was perfect, but because it wasn't broken in the same way anymore. And sometimes that's all life gives you. Not closure, not victory, just the ability to sit in the same place without everything hurting the same way it used to. The real lesson in this story isn't about invoices, weddings, or even betrayal. It's about how quietly truth reveals itself when you stop rushing to defend appearances. Magnus didn't win because he was louder, smarter, or more powerful. He won because he was patient enough to let the facts speak, when emotions had already done all the shouting they needed to do. And sometimes in life, that's the hardest thing to do. Stay calm when someone is trying to rewrite your reality in front of you. We often trust confidence, polish, and certainty. People like Landon Pierce understand that. They build their image carefully, hoping no one will look too closely at the structure underneath. But life has a way of exposing patterns. Not all at once, but piece by piece until what was hidden becomes undeniable. And when that moment arrives, no amount of charm can protect what wasn't built on honesty. But the deeper truth is even more painful. Exposure doesn't just break illusions, it also breaks relationships. Magnus didn't walk away feeling victorious. He walked away understanding that protecting his daughter meant she had to face a version of love that wasn't what she believed it was. And that kind of protection always comes with a cost. If there's something to take from this, it's this: don't ignore what repeats itself. Don't confuse comfort with truth. And don't underestimate the quiet people. They are often the ones who see everything. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this, being a part of